Welcome back to the We're Open podcast. Today's guest was the lead designer for TCG. Let's find out what's on deck. Hey Chuck, thanks for joining us. How did you get into card designing and end up at SOE?
My degree is in art, and I was a graphic artist. We try to play test games because sometimes there used to be open calls for playtesters. I got lucky at a barbecue, got a playtest copy of Star Trek CCG from Decipher. Eventually, they invited me, and I moved out there. We worked on Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. Decipher was great. They had some financial problems and had to shut down. There was a guy named Scott Martins who was doing the Decipher's Lord of the Rings online. I got in touch with him after I left Decipher, and he said, yeah, come on out. At that point, his company used to be called Worlds Apart, and it became SOE. We'd started with Legends of Norath and the Star Wars Galaxies game, and Free Realms was coming out, and we got some preliminary artwork and discussions about what it was going to be, so we made a card game for that.
So Decipher was mainly CCG and SOE TCG. Was it hard to transition from one to the other?
The funny thing is that even though Decipher used CCG, they called it customizable card game. But basically the difference is a lot of the games when they went online, you couldn't trade. The term I prefer is trading card game, which is what was pioneered by the Magic the Gathering. I like that because it tells you it's a card game and it's done with cards you can trade, and everybody knows what a trading card is. The Free Realms TCG was a TCG because we made a physical version of it, which had cards like this one. That's my Chaz Lambo card. We had a deal where you could get a card. I pick my character and pick what job I wanted to have. We would send out 10 copies of the card with this little code so that you could then take that code in the game and you could play with.
I would have loved to have my own card. You were a TCG lead designer. What does a designer do when it comes to cards?
I was a narrative designer, which means I wrote prompt text and came up with the ideas for the expansions, stories about what's going on, who's stealing what, are there magical artifacts, or whatever. Write the game text. I don't program, but writing game text and doing it well is almost like programming. It's certainly helpful steps that have to be very clear. Like my Chaz Lambo card here, he was a hero human and card duelist. And we call those traits. And they are things that you can leverage with gameplay, which means I can write a piece of game text that says, whenever you play a card duelist, draw a card. And coming up with ideas for new characters and new storylines. You can't really tell a story with a card game because the cards don't come out in the right order. There is a kind of a thread, and we tried to include characters from the game that were already in there. The people who were with SOE, and we would talk to them about, well, what are you doing? What's the next thing for Free Realms, and how can we put that in our card games? It's cross-promotional type of thing. We had loot cards. There was a lot of coordinating going on between the people that do the programming for the way the game systems work, and they have to set in the system for where do I put this code I got off the card or wherever you got it. The integration was key, I think.
I couldn't imagine all the logistics that go into digital and physical cards, like how Topps printed out the cards.
And it's a big difference when you talk about designing. It's going to be in cardboard and online because there's so many things you can do online that you can't do with a physical tabletop game. Not just the effects that go off, which are great, but just counting things, or you can have the computer be like your best friend at the table telling you, don't forget that, don't forget that. There's more design space is what we would call it.
The digital tutorials and guides were extremely helpful. Ignoring post-launch updates, how long does it take to make a TCG?
We'd get 6 or 8 or maybe 9 months, something like that. And there would be a lot of games played by us to be testing. The designers and the QA people and the developers that work for the company, they would play the new games, and we would take their notes and fix things or make things smoother or easier to understand. Then we would have other playtesters that sign an NDA, people that we could trust or we knew, get them at home. It's like PDF games. People always say, well, why didn't you catch this when in your playtesting? Well, internal playtesting would be probably several hundred games with maybe a couple dozen people. But when the game releases, that's tens of thousands at least, if not 100,000 people playing the game off right away. So there's always something that slips through the cracks. And it feels bad. We try and fix whatever we can.
That's very understandable. TCG was the only game for Free Realms that had its own department. Why do you think that is?
TCGs were a strange sort of animal to be able to play a bunch of cards out of a few hundred cards and have them all work together. It's very complicated. So there was a very small team that when we got to the Free Realms TCG, we knew that it would be played by a lot of teenagers who were not deeply into this card game stuff. So there was a certain level of complexity that we didn't go past. One of the things is complicated timing rules, which any full-blown TCG has. Things like you're going to do something on your turn, and I play a card, and I say, I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to play this, I'm going to cancel what you're doing. Those kind of shenanigans are one of the things you can take out, and TCG cards had a cost and an attack and defense, and that was it. Some games have many, many more numerical characteristics on them.
Those are great ways to accommodate young players. You also utilized the UA Lab for help?
As the designers, we would sit and we would watch. It really helped you understand how the game was going to perform, played by people who didn't know anything about it. We had new people come into the company. We would say, have you ever played a trading card game? And they'd go, no. We said, oh, okay, wait, don't. It was such a precious resource for us. We could use them to test new games.
What a cool way to research. What was it like seeing your card games come to life?
It's fantastic. The first time I ran into this was we had just released the Young Jedi card game, and there was a Star Wars convention, and we debuted with Young Jedi there. We walked around tables watching dozens of people playing the game, and it was a very magical moment there.
That must be so special. You were in quite a few SOE videos. What was it like being a face for TCG?
I really enjoyed that. Mark Tuttle, his background was radio. Perfectly natural to him to say, yeah, we're going to make a video and you're going to talk on it and we're going to mess around and joke and have fun.
The videos came out great. You left SOE before they were acquired by Daybreak. What did you do after?
A good friend of mine, Tom Lischke, who was a producer at SOE, he went to work for EA, which made Madden, but he said, you should come down here. So I got to go to work for Madden, which was amazing because I think there was a couple hundred people in SOE making 3 realms. So when I got to EA Tiburon in Orlando, they had a 6-story building and they had 400 people in there that just worked on Madden, which was a huge step up in terms of quantity of fellow developers that were working on the game. They had a game called Madden Ultimate Team. We called it MUT. It was a live service kind of game. They could react to things that happened on Sunday with a new card on Tuesday, which is pretty amazing to be able to turn around that fast.
What an impressive turnaround time. Now that you're retired, what is it like seeing your impact on the industry?
It's wonderful that people are keeping the lights alive and continuing to play the games. The game is never dead as long as somebody is playing it.
A lot of players were really invested in TCG. What are your thoughts on FRS?
I didn't know about Sunrise until I looked at some of the videos that were on your channel. That's pretty cool if it works.
Hopefully it will. Before we go, do you have a favorite memory at SOE?
SOE used to have their own convention. It was often in Vegas. It was a convention for about 2,000 people that were very avid fans of all of our games. They could all register and get together and play our games and talk about them. So I love going to conventions. It's really very fulfilling as a creative person.
The conventions looked like a lot of fun. Thanks so much for all your work on Free Roams, Chuck. We hope to play TCG again soon.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
A big thank you to Chuck for speaking with us today. Want to know who our next guest is? Subscribe to stay updated.